shine. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up.
Happy New Year and welcome back to the first Layover show for 2021. For those of you who have been with us before, thanks for coming back. And for those people who are new to the show, welcome and thanks for watching. Now, I don't know about you, Mark, but I, for one, am quite happy to see the back end of 2020. For many people, it was quite stressful with employment and not being able to see their families, sort of stayed in isolation a little bit.
I think everybody's over 2020 a little bit.
I mean, we still had to put up the Scott online.
Oh, be careful, be careful. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hello, Mark and Lindsay. It has been actually, I've got tea tonight. This has been the longest that we haven't had a layover, actually. A little break over Christmas. And I noticed you had a break, Lindsay.
I did.
That today.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So I didn't realise I'd done it, but I had a little break from social media, stayed off Twitter. It was probably because I was trying to organise Christmas, so it looked like Santa had thrown up here in the house. It
was good. It was amazing.
It was so good that Mark sent me the card that I had bought for him.
I think I found a card. I thought, oh, that's a nice card. I can't remember buying that, but it's a nice card. So I sent that to Linz.
Meanwhile, I'm frantically trying to find the card that I bought for Mark.
Anyway, it's one of those things.
Right, so slightly off topic, and I know this is off script. Was Father Christmas good to you? What did you get? Any aviation stuff?
Mark bought me running trainers.
Oh.
I got an aeroplane beer tankard, a vintage one, and some Spitfire themed gin that hasn't quite arrived yet, but it's got a little bit of a Spitfire in the gin bottle. Pretty amazing.
What is that, instead of a worm inside the tequila bottle?
Yeah, I'll go for that every single time. How cool is that? How about you?
What did you get?
Well, aviation related, I got some cufflinks from Aerotiques, a bit of IVG, an aeroplane that I've flown on previously, made into some nice cufflinks. But that was about it, aviation related. You know me, I always buy gadgets during the year. So when it comes to Christmas, there's nothing left on the list, sadly. Sorry, I went off topic then, Lindsay. Sorry, you tell me off now.
Our biggest drama over Christmas was I had ordered a turkey for 9 people. And when the rules came in to say, you know, you can't meet up with people and the tiers are changing, I'd already committed to this turkey for 9. So we had turkey pretty much every day until New Year's Day.
Just finished.
So you're going to put those trainers to good use.
Yeah,
exactly.
Anyway,
so social media, what have we been? I mean, I've not been present with this. So Scott, what has captured your eye over the last couple of weeks?
Oh, a couple of things. I think the first thing that's captured my eye is actually, sadly, we had a crash this week, didn't we?
Yeah.
A 737. Sadly, we've got no idea what happened to it, and we're not going to speculate because you know my views on that. In fact, I've got a tweet that I brought up, which has actually probably been my bizarrely not coming up. A tweet that basically it talks about not speculating, and it's one of the most popular tweets I've had up this month. About 1,200 likes. It's been seen by over 250,000 people.
Wow.
This tweet, and it really, I think it's something that Mark and you and I all share a passion about. Is we see the numbers on these things, and this particular accident has had, within an hour, the names of the people in the manifest of the crew were published online by a number of outlets, which I think is just abhorrent. And what I'm trying to say is really that behind every number, is a person, and behind every number is a family searching for answers. So guessing, misinformation on social media, sensationalism. I mean, I saw this link to the 737 MAX. It's not even that type of airplane. It's just utter nonsense. And I think we all share that actually that kind of media sensationalism might get you a few clicks in the short term, but actually it does the families no good. And it's something that I'm quite passionate about. And I'd really like to say to people, please don't retweet that kind of stuff, because actually you are causing unseen damage to those families who are just looking for answers.
Yeah, it's such a shame. Such a shame. And just, I know it's natural. People kind of want to know, and they want to know instantly in this kind of world, but you're not going to know. There's no answer right now. That's the first. No. The first answer is that there's no answer.
Yeah. And anybody who says that they know what the answer is lying.
Yeah, it's just not true.
It's just not true. Now, the other stuff that I saw, and this was a really good one. Now, this was...
I've got a video here, actually. Shall I?
Oh, have you got a video? Right, let's show the video first then.
All right.
Video. Good job.
I was willing that to land there.
There's an awful lot going on there, wasn't there?
There is an awful lot going on. And, you know, I saw thousands and thousands of comments on this saying, why didn't they just go somewhere else? Well, actually, we don't know what they were thinking. We don't know what situation they were in. And that's what these videos are all about, really, is, one, we've got no idea what situation the pilots are in. I mean, that was in Germany. The entire country of Germany could have been worse than that, and that was his best option. The best tweet I saw was takeoffs are optional, landings aren't. And that sums that up for me. I mean, they were working really hard there. It was obviously a gusty wind because there was a lot of movement. The parallax on the video maybe makes it look a little bit worse than it actually was. But actually, I think they did a good job. They put it down in the right place. There was a few moments there I might have pooped my pants if I was flying it. But
or a passenger.
Or a passenger. I would not have liked to have been in the seat at the back of that Dash 8, the one right at the very back. That would have been vomit-inducing. But what do you think? I mean, I'll open it up. I thought it was a good job, really.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it looked like right spot, didn't it? And
yeah,
I mean, it just looks ferocious weather. I mean, goodness knows what the actual wind was. I didn't look very closely at it, I have to say. I never like critiquing people's landings afterwards. I know from, you know, when we go flying afterwards, we do post-flight reviews and things like that. I'm sure they would have learned something afterwards.
Yeah, don't go flying in the wind is probably the thing they learned. Yeah.
Right, Mike, what about you?
I've been flying.
Well,
I have been flying a real
this
aeroplane.
in itself is news.
So, and it's actually the first time I've flown passengers, I think, probably for about a year. I've done lots of other bits and pieces. I've done air tests and moving airplanes around and lots of simulator things and all of the stuff to stay current. But I went and flew a real airplane. I flew a beautiful brand new 321 Neo, which was marvelous. And I tell you what I was struck by was how normal everything felt and how well behaved everyone was and how seamless everything was. So there you go. You know, it's just not true that people are constantly punching each other in the face in the aisles and so on. But yeah, it was great.
Looked lovely, actually. I saw some of your photos. Looked absolutely amazing, actually, some of the views. You're very fortunate to be able to fly during the day because, as you know, most of the long-haul flights are at night, and we don't get as great views. But I was with the views of the mountains were amazing.
Yeah, really good. It was just wonderful. It was wonderful to get away from the office or this room as it's now known, and it was good. It was good fun.
And the Delta.
Oh my goodness! So
we had to stop everything at home for this when this tweet came out. Let me show you a picture.
I like a propeller-driven airliner.
I did see this actually, and I did engage with Mark on this one because I have to agree with him. I think this is from the romantic era of airliners. This is when you got dressed up to go flying in your with your suit on, and they served carvery by cutting it next to you before and serving it on a plate. You know, that's what I want to fly. I want to go back to those days.
And that's a DC-7C, I think. Delta have, by the looks of it, and I've only ever seen pictures of it. I've not been there. And Scott, you and I have said we must go. They have a fantastic heritage centre museum, but obviously DC-7C was right up there with the Super Constellation and all the sort of the very last of the pre-jet age airliners, and it's a beautiful looking thing. And I love those old liveries. I just love the those kind of almost like deco looking liveries. Wonderful.
Scott, please take him to the Heritage Museum for me.
I am going to actually, as soon as we can possibly go to Atlanta, because there is a jumbo jet there, and they've done a really good job of putting one of the last jumbos there. So we could actually maybe do a bit of a tour, and we could do Atlanta, and then go to Wright-Patterson to see the museum there, and then we could probably go to Oshkosh, and then we'd have to come back via Vegas. Not that there's a museum in Vegas. We just have to come back via Vegas.
I could come and meet you guys in Vegas. How does that sound?
That sounds a really bad idea. Yeah, if I'm being honest, that sounds like a really, really bad idea.
And the last tweet that you looked at?
Yeah, this is a great picture. So 80th anniversary of the amazing Lancaster bomber, which was originally called the Manchester 3, I think. Manchester Mark 3. And I think this guy took it through his glass sunroof, but the next picture is actually the crop that he did, which is just stunning. All those little Lancasters in the raindrops. I thought it was a wonderful little tribute.
Yeah, it's stunning. I did actually see he did one where he was lying in a field of wheat as well. I don't know if you saw that one, just off the edge of the Coningsby runway, and he caught it perfectly as it flew over the top of him with the wheat around it. It was his pictures are stunning. Either that or he's really, really good at Photoshop.
Really lucky.
Yeah.
Right, can we move on?
Yeah, let's get on.
Our first guest of 2021, and we're setting the bar pretty high for the rest of the year. In actual fact, you could say it's out of this world. So we're extremely lucky to have Squadron Leader Bonnie Posselt joining us this evening. So Bonnie's a squadron leader in the UK's Royal Air Force, and she specialises in space and aviation medicine. Now, Bonnie's actually joining us from the States, where she's on an exchange programme with the United States Air Force, which I'm hoping she's going to tell us a little bit more about. So we're going to talk to Bonnie this evening about her journey into this career, how significant space is to the UK in the sort of coming years and decades. We're going to hear about her involvement in this really cool project, which was like a simulation to Mars. We're going to talk about some military kit that she's been working on. And then we've got some quick fire questions to round off the evening. And like all our shows, if you've got a question for Bonnie, then use our chat feature or the comments feature, and we can ask the questions as we go. So let me bring in Bonnie. Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
How was Christmas for you? Were you over in the States? Or?
Yeah, so we stayed in the States, pretty low-key, pretty grey and pretty cold over here, but trying to lay low like everyone else is. So we have an 18-month-old, so mostly just watching her open presents and then put them to one side and play with the wrapping paper. So.
And you presumably did Thanksgiving as well, the sort of Christmas warm-up, the practice.
Thanksgiving is great. It's like all the food without having to worry about the presents.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Maybe, I was about to say maybe we can learn something from that, actually.
Perfect. So, Bonnie, just for everyone that's listening for us, could you give us just a quick outline to what your job role is and what that actually means? What do you do?
Sure. So in short, I'm a medical doctor and I specialise in aviation and space medicine. Normally, at the moment, I'm taking some time out of training to do some research over in the US. So I'm doing a PhD looking at human performance and helmet-mounted display systems. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit later. But my normal job back in the UK, where I work at the Centre of Aviation Medicine, which is in Bedfordshire, just north of London, is understanding the aviation environment, also understanding humans in sickness and in health, and being able to merge the two. So to enable people, pilots, passengers, crew, to perform to the best of their abilities in the aviation environment, bearing in mind that there's lots of different types of aviation environments. So helicopters are very different to commercial airliners, to fast jets, to parachutists. So understanding all of those different environments and then enabling people to not just survive, but to perform to the best of their ability in that situation.
So with that, how did you what sparked your interest to going down that career pathway? Were you interested in medicine or were you interested in aviation?
So kind of going all the way back to when I was at school, so I joined the Air Cadets, which is, I think, a familiar theme for many people in the military. And I loved flying. And then I loved sciences, and I was doing kind of chemistry, physics at A-level. And when I found out that you could do medicine in the Air Force, I was like, wow, this is like the perfect career. And then when I was at university, I did an extra degree in aerospace physiology, and I learned about this aspect of medicine that merged medicine very much in my passion for flying and the aviation environment, and working with those types of people. Kind of, for me, day to day working in a hospital just wasn't something that floated my boat. So once I found that this was an option, that's what I pursued. And I'm very fortunate to be in a position now that the RAF took upon a chance to train me in aviation and space medicine. It's a new specialty. Aviation medicine's always existed, but it was all kind of an apprenticeship within the Air Force. And to bring it into line with other medical specialties, the General Medical Council, which is like a national body, and the Royal College of Physicians, along with some specialist input, came up with this national curriculum. So now any doctor across the whole of the UK can train in aviation space medicine. So the curriculum was released in 2016, and so now it's very much this is what you have to achieve to be a doctor in this, rather than just kind of an apprenticeship. Spend a few years and you'll be a consultant. So there is very much a curriculum that we have to follow. It's not NHS funded, so the UK do not need a whole bunch of aerospace medicine doctors. So you have to find someone who's going to pay for your training. At the moment in the UK, there's two organisations who will pay for your training, the RAF and the CAA. And there are 6 trainees nationally. So there's not many of us. It's a very small specialty. But yeah, that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So was that sort of a voluntary position for you? Did you say, hello, I've got an interest, I want to get into it? Or is there a selection process you have to go through for that speciality?
So there is a selection process because it's an approved curriculum at each point in my medical career. So once I finished medical school, I had to be competitively selected to do my kind of junior doctor training.
Sure.
And then again, for my kind of registrar specialist medicine post, I interviewed again at that point. But I'd made sure I pestered enough people in the RAF from an early stage. So whilst I was in the university, saying to everyone, I want to do this specialty. And a few people would tell me, that specialty doesn't even exist yet. I was like, this is what I want to do. And a lot of people would tell me, well, make sure you've got a backup, maybe become a GP and then think about it later on. And, I always pestered and pestered. And it got to the point that, because it is quite a very niche job, that when they were looking to train someone, a few people were like, oh, I know the person who this job is going to be good for. And then And that's how it works, like networking and pestering and being a bit of a pain and just pursuing your dreams is sometimes what it takes. And I was very lucky the RAF took me on.
And how long is the training? Like, what's the course length?
So once you finish med school, everyone has to do kind of 2 years of just general doctoring.
Okay.
And then you go into kind of your core medical training, which for me took 3 years.
Okay.
You take a year out just to do RAF stuff and officer training. And then my specialist, aviation space medicine, the curriculum is 4 years, but I've extended it by an extra 3 years to do a PhD. So I'm kind of at the end of my training. So I'm nearly there. I'm doing this 3 years in America. And then when I get back, I'll pretty much have finished. And that's me. I'll be a consultant at the Centre of Aviation Medicine.
It's funny because we were talking about the Centre of Aviation Medicine. So both myself and Scott used to be in the Air Cadets, and Mark's the only person who wasn't in it. He feels a little bit left out.
I do feel a bit left out.
But I did my first solo at the volunteer gliding school when I was a cadet, and that was based at Henlow.
Me too.
And we always used to walk past Cam to get to and from the front gate down to the VGS hut.
Did they ever show you in around? Did you ever get to see the chambers, the hypoxia chambers?
Yeah, so my squadron was nearby, so we used to do squadron visits, and it was really cool. I think, you know, when you're a sort of 13, 14-year-old cadet, it's a cool visit to go on. But I think unless you're really kind of interested in that particular area, you don't really maybe take in as much as you would do if you had a keen interest in it.
And I think
just wait until we show you our new centrifuge up at RAF Cranwell. It's really cool.
So I did have a question about centrifuges. So we live relatively close to Farnborough, and that's where the centrifuge used to be, and then it disappeared somewhere. So
it's still there.
Is it still there? Okay.
I have a very fond spot for the centrifuge. So it's one of the oldest operating centrifuges in the world. So it was built in the 1950s, and it was still operational up until about 2 years ago when the new centrifuge became operational at Cranwell. And the reason why we need a new centrifuge is because the one that's in Farnborough was quite, it had a slow onset of G that was not representative of the fast jet environment. So we needed a centrifuge that was more realistic. But the old one is incredible. So as the operator, I would sit in the middle. And because back in the day, they didn't have computer screens to relay video.
As the doctor.
Yeah, so I would sit in the middle and we'd have pilots in the gondola at the end. So we'd be spinning around like this in the middle. And the pilots would be on the gondola at the end. And because there was, kind of back in the 50s, there was no radio communication between the gondola and the middle person, that there was, the only way you could tell if someone had gone unconscious from the G is that they put a window in the top of the ceiling of the gondola so that you could see down the middle that the subject was unconscious. Obviously now we have video cameras and everything, so we much safer.
Oh right. Okay,
but,
so you've got to be looking in and basically see kind of vomit and flailing arms. Nice.
Yeah, not too much vomit because obviously the G-force keeps everything kind of.
Oh, that's lovely.
But in at Cranwell with our new high onset G centrifuge, you actually don't sit on the centrifuge. You sit in a separate room and watch the video camera. So I, as the operator, I used to really enjoy like sitting in the middle and being part of it. But they're never going to knock it down because it's actually a listed building. But they've built houses around it. But the actual centrifuge itself is still there.
Wow.
But Bonnie, I'm interested. So when you're sitting in the middle, spinning around like you are on your chair, how does that feel for you? I mean, is it disorienting for you, or because you're not going to feel sick because you're kind of static, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, some people didn't like it. I personally loved it. So, but because you're right in the middle, the G is not as much as the person at the gondola at the end. The only thing you have to be careful of is if you're spinning around in one direction, if you suddenly put your head down to look at something, you get Coriolis. So you'd get another inner ear semicircular canal. So you'd suddenly get a little bit disoriented.
Yeah.
But apart from that, yeah, it was
No, I was in the Air Force, and I'd been to Cam lots of times, and it was always fun going and have a couple of pints of Ruddles County ale, and then going into the chamber. Not so much fun for the doctor afterwards, but quite fun for us at the time. I see that Mark's had to go and run off, Lindsay. That is a code red with the baby.
He's run back for his drink.
No, for the milk.
For the milk. Yes. A regular, Bonnie, this is a regular occurrence because live shows are live shows. What do they say? Never work with children or animals.
We've got both of those here. Right, so let's move on, because I know that Mark wanted to talk to you about sort of helmet technology, and I believe that's what you're doing out in the States.
Yeah.
We might come back to that in just a little while.
Yeah.
I might have to tag him in shortly. But
right.
3 years ago, back in 2008.
Good now.
This is a good one tonight.
Awesome.
So you were involved in a Mars space simulation mission.
Yep. So part of my training in aviation space medicine was there weren't as many opportunities in the UK, so I was looking for some other opportunities to get my training ticks. And I found the Austrian Space Forum, and they're based out of Austria, and they run frequently analog space missions. So I got in touch with them, and after some time, I was recruited to be their medical officer. Okay. So I accompanied them for a 5-week mission in the deserts of Oman on a space mission. And I learned about space operations, and essentially an analog space mission is kind of a practice. So before you go to space for real, like, it's very expensive and there's a lot of risk. So in order to reduce the risk and reduce the cost, is that you practice here on Earth. And there's a number of, you can kind of range in fidelities of how close you want to get to the space environment. And the Austrian Space Forum chose the deserts of Oman because essentially it looks like Mars. We were remote, we were miles from anywhere. And this is our setup. So there were 15 of us in the field. 5 of the individuals had been specifically selected to be our analog astronauts, so the ones who would be putting on our spacesuits, our simulated spacesuits. So they weren't pressurized, but they were restrictive. So we had special devices in them that made them the same work as if it were a pressurized spacesuit. And they would be doing scientific experiments that had been submitted by universities and research organizations from all around the world. And so I can go into a number of the different experiments that we were conducting. And then we had a mission support crew who were back in Austria. So about 60 people who were supporting us. And, you know, they would be giving us the flight plans every day of who was doing what scientific experiments we were doing today, and running us through each of those things. And so I was the medical doctor, and I was responsible for a number of different things. So I was responsible for the general medical care of the crew, because cuts, slips, bruises, rashes, those things just happen. But I was also involved in space medicine operations. So before an astronaut would do their spacewalk and put on their heavy spacesuit, I would make sure that they were fit to do the spacewalk of the day, doing observations, and make sure that keep them in optimal health. And then during the spacewalk, I would sit in the kind of operations center and monitor all their vitals, because it's a closed system. So there's certain risks of being inside a closed system. So I'd be monitoring them closely. And then we had a 20-minute delay back to Austria, our mission support center, to simulate the communications delay you would have on Mars. So any questions and things we needed, we'd have to call back.
Wow.
Yeah, and we couldn't just call in. We were remote, so we had to order everything in advance, and you had to plan. And if we needed something, we couldn't call it in. You know, we were miles from anywhere. But then the other part of my medical kind of provision was to do the emergency medical cover. So for any reason, because we have to remember this is a simulation, but we are still on Earth. So we have to provide a level of medical cover that is still Earth level. So we're not on Mars. So it's important, if someone fell over and broke their leg, I needed to have plans in place to be able to evacuate them to definitive medical care if we needed it. So those are the different types of medicine and medical provision that I was providing. So as you can see here, this is our base camp. So we had organised, we slept in these ISO containers. So we had different rooms for that. We had our operations centre just there on the left. The middle bit is a little bit for show, but it kind of, we had architects getting involved to, what sort of habitat would you design for Mars? And then on the right, we had our messing accommodation, messing facilities and our dining facilities and our ablutions. And then up to the right, we had a waste. And then to the left, we had all the fuel and explosive things. But again, a slightly amusing story. So we had to order everything in advance, and a slight error in translation. We ended up with 40 kilograms of jalapenos for 5 weeks. So we had jalapenos with every meal, which was pretty fun.
And did you buy toilet rolls like it was lockdown? Because you're probably going to need them with all those jalapenos, I would have thought.
Exactly.
I find it.
Go
on, Lindsay. No, I just find you talked a little bit about the medical stuff there, and just one of the questions that I had in my mind is, what are you're obviously looking at the long-term issues of isolation here, aren't you? Because effectively they're isolating. What did you learn from that in terms of mental health, well-being, other things you're going to be able to put into place to try and combat that feeling of isolation?
Absolutely. So I think crew composition is really, really important. So we were a bunch of individuals from different countries. So there were 15 of us, and we were from 9 different countries. And we'd all kind of trained together virtually and also in person maybe twice on like the odd weekend in Austria. But I certainly had not been with everyone in one room together. So, and having people from different countries, there are culture differences and there are personality differences. And I think, and we were there just for 5 weeks. And, but at the end of 5 weeks, there were definitely some tensions on people. And I really think for isolation and confinement for crews, having the right makeup of crews, having them trained together in situations like this, testing them on Earth, can they work together as a team on Earth in relative safety for 6 months together to prepare them for a 3-year mission? You can't just put someone in and send them off on a mission, off you go. They need to practice, they need to train, they need to understand each other to be able to, know when to back off someone, know when to ask someone to do something. And I think that's really important. And also understanding that with every single person, there is, I think you've already mentioned before, every single person has a family behind them. So some people's families are different to other people's families. So they may have different requirements for keeping in touch with families, or different expectations of keeping in touch, or different reasons for doing so. So some people may have to call home a little bit more often than not. So, and everyone's different. And I think that's one of the biggest learning factors, is that everyone's different, and appreciating that, and that we are a whole big spectrum of people. So yeah, isolation is really important. Confinement is one of the big 5 concerns that NASA have when they're looking at exploration class missions. And analog missions are the perfect way of testing out the different combinations of people and enabling real astronauts to train and practice with each other before going on a real mission.
And I guess for these training sort of exercises, would you go through sort of like the psychological testing that you would apply to the astronauts as well? Like what sort of pre-testing and pre-considerations are done before you actually get to the desert?
So it very much depends on the organisation. And this is something I'm actually passionate about. I'm involved in a group of medics across the spectrum of analog missions to try and improve the safety of analog missions around the world. So space agencies have their own analog platforms, and they have very strict selection criteria, and similar to real astronauts. There's a number of research analog missions that sometimes are run by volunteers and sometimes don't necessarily have as rigorous standards, because there is no set of regulations. You can choose as your commander what risk you're going to take on board for who you're going to take on this mission. And that really should be a decision made with a medical personnel who understands the environment and understands the medical risk that you're willing to take. Technically, anyone can go, but it's about what level of risk you're willing to take. And those are informed decisions that you need to make with the group, with individuals, and with the medical personnel. So yeah, there should be selection standards for remote environments. What they are very much depends on what you're trying to do and what equipment you're using. So if you're researching just the isolation, then you may have different standards for if you're in a spacesuit simulator. So our spacesuits have anthropometric limits. So we actually physically, we had selection standards based on size of people, and our spacesuits were 50 kilograms. So, they were doing tasks. There had to be a minimum fitness and strength standard to be able to do the job, whereas that standard may not exist for someone who's doing simulation and different types of research with different equipment. So, and that's why this is different to just an expedition, because the space operations depend on the job you're trying to do and the equipment that you're using, and they feed into your medical standards of what you're going to decide what is an acceptable medical standard.
I've got a picture here, Bonnie, which I'm going to bring up. And maybe you can just give us a kind of explanation as to what's going on here. So for people who are listening on podcasts, can you sort of describe what we're seeing here?
Sure. So this is one of the experiments that we were conducting out in the desert, and it's testing a closed system. So this was actually an experiment submitted by the Italian Space Agency, and they gave us the equipment, and we set it all up, and we had in each of these, so we've got racks of vegetables that we're growing, and in each of the layers we had different schedules of artificial light and watering requirements. So we're trying to work out if you're in space, like what is the optimum lighting and water schedule to grow the best amount of food. Obviously we weren't simulating microgravity, which is very much would impact how things grow, but it still is answering some of the question. And what I liked about this experiment is that so certain people tended it every day to check in on it. But at the end of the 5-week period, we actually were able to harvest the salad, and we were able to eat the salad leaves for one of our meals, which was really great.
That's awesome. The infrastructure that you built, just to go back to the Mars base, if you want to call it that, is that still there? Did they leave that there, Bonnie, after they pulled it all down, did they? So it's not something that you could reuse again, and because it just looks very Space 1999, doesn't it? It looks awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool, and it was. You can actually see just on the horizon there, because we're kind of in oil fields at night. You know, the sky was pristine, and on the horizon you could see some of the oil kind of towers that burn fuel, like outlet fuel. So it was just really surreal to see this incredible night sky, and you know, in this picture that there's quite a bit of humidity in the atmosphere, so you'd see this glow on the horizon that was just surreal. It was really cool.
So at the end of the 5 weeks, when the sort of training period was finished, did you find that you were able to answer all the sort of research that you went out for? You know, all the questions that you had, were you able to answer them? Or were there still bits and pieces where you thought, actually, we need to do a bit more work in this area?
Oh, loads. So we were actually really enablers. So the research that we did, we obviously sent the results back to the teams that submitted the experiments. So I don't necessarily know exactly what they've analysed from all of the different teams. We certainly fed back some real lessons learned. Like there was one team, they created this amazing experiment in the lab, and we got it sent to us, and within 2 days, because of the sand and the dust, it was inoperable. So we actually couldn't necessarily give them the results that they were hoping for, but we certainly gave them a lesson of this is what you need to do to operate in this environment. So and those different teams will then publish their research and their results and their findings. And I was really kind of a support person to enable that mission to happen rather than to publish research myself. But as the medical team, we have published on, we had one experiment on kind of fatigue, but also on safety standards and lessons learned and medical space medicine ideas on those things. So, and we published at the Aerospace Medicine Association, and we've got an article on its way.
And were there any shockers? Like, were there any moments where you thought, wow, we were not expecting that, or anything that kind of took you by surprise and you thought, wow, that's really cool, we didn't, we hadn't considered that?
So it's not really cool, but I, as the medical person, like, I had some quite scary moments, and I had moments where I very much realized that I was very alone as a medical person. That leaves you quite open to stuff happening, and it's only when stuff starts to happen you realize, oh, it's just me out here. So something that was really of concern to me is when they chose Oman. So I wasn't involved in that decision. The organization made that decision when they did their recce's and obviously scope location. Is once we got there, the temperatures were about 10 degrees higher than we were expecting. Okay. And so for me, from a medical point of view, I was concerned with heat illnesses and heat stress, particularly operating heavy machinery and exercising and having that kind of heat load. And so I had to come up very quickly with some procedures and some mitigations to try and reduce any risk of heat illnesses. But no, there was, those are kind of scary moments. Like the cool moments really would be mostly just watching the sunset and the sunrises and looking at the stars. Those were the pinch me moments. The other moments I was actually working pretty hard a lot of the time and concentrating and reading what resources I could and making sure I had my go bag and making sure I had rechecked all of the equipment. And so actually I didn't get that much chance to have cool moments because I actually had to work pretty hard.
I know Lindsay wants to come on to it in a minute, Bonnie, but I'm utterly fascinated by this and the length of time that you're going to be effectively on your own, and you've kind of covered that there in the isolation thing. It's that stuck in a tin can, It's not just the being there, it's the getting there, and the getting there is going to take a long time as well as the being there, and it's just a long way. And you feel, I think you would just feel very, very isolated. It's not, I know this is trying to simulate it, but oh my goodness, it's a hostile environment and there's so much going on. I know Lindsay wants to talk about it, so I won't go into it too much, but I just find it utterly fascinating. Yeah.
But I think from what I've heard from a lot of astronauts who are on board the ISS is that, they say that the work that they're doing up there, particularly the ones who've been up there for a long periods of time, kind of a year, the science and the research gives them a sense of purpose. So I really think, I do believe that on exploration missions that, it takes you 9 months to get somewhere, you have to give the astronauts something kind of to do on the way there, and not just something to do to entertain themselves. If they have something to do that is important and has results that other people will rely on, then they have a real sense of purpose and that keeps them going. So but you're absolutely right. Psychology and kind of trying to address those issues of isolation and confinement are really important.
So Bonnie, sorry, go on, Scott.
No, I was just going to talk about the physiological factors as well, and I'm very aware that muscle atrophy, muscle wasting is a big issue, particularly for those who are in space for a very long time. I mean, we're talking a Mars mission is going to be measured in years, not months. Yeah. How are you going to counter that kind of problem when you bring the individual back, or are we just sending them on a one-way ticket here, Bonnie? They're going and they're not coming back. I mean, it's a long way to get help, and it's a long way to go back as well.
Yeah, 100% categorically, no space agency has ever said that it would be a one-way ticket. This would be returning people to Earth. So that's not an option. So if we're going to go, we're coming back. So that's first of all, important to make sure that there's that kind of standard is set. Talking about muscle loss and muscle wastage and bone loss, we've come a long way from understanding the human body in space in the last 50 years, to such an extent that, you know, in the early days of the shuttle missions back in the kind of 80s and 90s, astronauts would lose up to 20% of their bone mass. You know, kind of one, and if we talk about, so elderly people lose about 1% of their bone mass a year, and astronauts are losing kind of 20% of their bone mass in kind of 2-3 months. So it's a massive amount of bone mass. However, we've come such a long way with understanding nutrition and developing exercise countermeasures to combat that, to such a degree that Tim Peake, when he came back from his 6-month mission, he'd only lost 2% of his bone mass, down to effective exercise that they do 2 hours a day to make sure that you build and you keep that bone mass. So we've come a long way, but you're right, there's still a lot of advances that we need to make. One of the concerns is once you land on Mars. So at the moment, when you come back to Earth for rehab, back to a 1G environment, you've got a whole host of people who meet you when you land, who help you stand up and help, you know, get you, look after you. When you get to Mars, you're not going to have any of that. You're not going to have a support squad helping you. So we need to make sure that the astronauts get to Mars in a fit enough state to do the mission. Because what you don't want is someone falling over and breaking their hip because they've lost bone mass. Because there's not going to be a rescue mission. And if that happens, yes, you're right, it will be a one-way mission. So we need to prevent that from happening. And those things have been going on for the last 20 years. And we have made big advances, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
It's really interesting. I've watched some videos of astronauts when they've come back from space, and I think there was one video, and I think it might have been a woman who fainted when she was giving sort of an interview. Yeah. And then from that moment on, they then sat the astronauts down sort of to give their post mission interviews. You know, it's really fascinating. And there's videos of people learning how to walk again because they've not walked for months, and you know, and they struggle using their legs. Yeah,
space is a tough environment.
Wow. Okay, so on the way to Mars, how is it? 3 years are they planning for the Mars trip?
Well, it depends on how long you want to stay on the surface, and it depends on the circle of the trajectory of the different planets as to how you get there. But from what I've seen, the most efficient way would take about 9 months to get there. You'd spend like a month or two on the surface and then 9 months to come back. So looking at kind of a 2-3 year mission.
And what would a Mars crew look like? What's the like? How many people are on board? You know, what's the composition? You know, do people have are they multi-rolled? Have they got specialist roles? You know, who would be in the lineup for the press sort of shot?
So first of all, I think it would be a smaller crew. And again, I must highlight, this is all based on my personal opinion. Like, I'm not involved in any of these decisions. It's based on my personal opinion, based on my reading and my kind of collaborations that I had with other people in my experience. But it would be a smaller crew. And absolutely, you're right. People would have to be involved in every different aspect. So when I was on the analog mission, I was still expected to have chef responsibility some days. I'd still be expected to repair equipment. I'd be expected to go and clean out the waste pumps. I'd still be expected to do certain things around the camp. So absolutely, you'd have to be rolled in pretty much everything. Every person in that crew should be able to do the role of everyone else to a degree, but each person would probably have a specialist interest. I don't think you really can exactly tell what's going to be in the crew. I think going back to Mars would be a better way for trying to work out what we're going to need for a crew to Mars. But I think we are talking about, you know, at the moment we have the space station, which is the size of a football field. It's vast. The astronauts are in relative luxury. They can go online, they can tweet from space, they can call schools, they can have whatever kind of food they want sent up, and they have lots of space to move around. When we're talking about exploration class missions, we're going to be thinking about particularly the early ones, the early missions, going back to like the Apollo style tin can like kind of spacecraft. They're not going to have vast amounts of space. move around in. So it's going to be much more austere and remote, and definitely not as luxurious as astronauts have it currently.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I've managed to see the Orion capsule, and going all the way to Mars and that is going to be tough, particularly if there's any more than one of you. It'd be pretty cool. Sorry, Lindsay, go on.
So I've got some questions, Bonnie. So we're on this 9-month trip to Mars, and we're part of the crew. What happens if somebody gets ill? Now, I guess there's varying degrees of illness, from a headache. But what if somebody is significantly ill on the way to Mars? What is there, like an action plan? Is there a process that happens?
Absolutely, and those are things that the Human Research Project are looking at, those exact questions in NASA. So first of all, the first line of defense is prevention.
Sure.
So particularly for austere remote missions, you want to be choosing people who are really unlikely to have heart attacks, or really unlikely to have tumors and things like that. And you can screen out those sorts of things. So the first people are going to be highly selected personnel. So you need to kind of think about what injuries or what illnesses could occur in space. And we look back historically to what has occurred, and there are a whole variety of things like the urinary tract and kidney infection, coughs and colds have happened, but also electrical burns have happened, and things like that. So you need to first of all work out what potentially could occur, to then be able to think about what resources you're going to take to cater for the things that could occur. Okay. So you're trying to work out what those known unknowns are. You then have to think about your resources, and there are going to be some things that may be treatable on Earth that you're just not going to be able to treat in space. So like massive head trauma, you're just not going to have the resources to be able to treat that, and that is an inherent risk of spaceflight that needs to be accepted. So because you're not going to be able to deliver Earth-based care in space. So, and there's not going to be a rescue mission. I think ultimately that's that. If we're going to the moon, you can get back from the moon in 2-3 days. Yeah. Space station, you can get back from the space station, if you really need an emergency, in 6 hours. There are places on the Earth that are more remote than the space station. Wow. But you do have to cram yourself. With the new Dragon capsule, you've got a little bit more space, but you have to cram yourself into a Soyuz capsule that is, if you're pretty unwell, it's not easy. You have to be able to withstand the rigors of re-entry and the G-forces associated with that. So a really, really sick person, it's probably going to be difficult to bring them back. But I'd say that the first line is going to be prevention. To prevent a major incident happening, you can prevent it by selecting and trying to mitigate against those risks before they happen.
Sure. Now we had a question come in before, which was, can you do CPR in space?
In fact, wow. You should write one. Exactly. Well, there's actually a number of different approved methods of CPR in space. So, so first of all, why would you do CPR in space? So if someone's had a heart attack, which again we would try and prevent by screening out people for having them. But the greatest risk in our astronaut population is if they were to be electrocuted, okay, and cause arrhythmias in your heart rhythm that may require a shock or CPR to get it back into a good rhythm. So there's a number of methods. So I might need to kind of stand up for this one. So you have the handstand method, which essentially you kind of wedge yourself into one bit of the spacecraft. You have the person there, and you do CPR. Oh, okay. So you're standing, you're kind of wedging yourself, and you're standing yourself like that way. Okay. You then have.
I hadn't considered you could use the ceiling.
And that's what I thought as well. Like, you wedge yourself in, because I thought Newton's law. Here we go. We're going to be all over the place after every push.
You can tell I'm very lumpy.
An area of the spacecraft that is designed for that, and you have to accommodate different heights of astronauts. Anyway, you have the reverse kind of bear hug maneuver, where you have the person in front of you and you kind of grasp around them, and then you do it's basically like a Heimlich maneuver, but a little bit kind of further up. And then you have the kind of straddle maneuver, where you would kind of straddle them from the front and try and push down that way. Ultimately, whatever happens, it's going to be pretty difficult. If you deem it's necessary, you can take up one of these automated devices that you strap on and is able to compress someone's chest kind of for you. However, it has a mass, you have to take that with you. So that's the risk that you kind of, that's the thing you have to think about. But you do have to think about, so once you've brought someone back from a dodgy heart rhythm, you have to think about supporting them. And normally on Earth we go to an intensive care unit, or you'd go to hospital.
Sure.
So you don't have those support mechanisms. So you do have to think about what you're going to do after CPR. But in itself, yes, and you can practice some of these things in a microgravity, an analog situation. So underwater is one of our microgravity simulations, and so trying to practice the different CPR maneuvers. But yeah, that's and there was a review paper that came out recently talking about the different methods of CPR. And again, I find it fascinating to think about something you would do on Earth that is just 10 times more difficult in space.
Yeah. I've got one more question. So one of my friends is a surgeon, and she said to me there's this myth going around that if you go on a long mission, then astronauts have their appendix removed. Is there any truth to this?
So it's not mandated at the moment, but for an exploration mission, there is an argument for it, because you cannot predict when someone would get an appendicitis. And if they were to have appendicitis, the only treatment option really is surgery to remove it. And surgery in space would be pretty messy, and you'd have to have someone who'd be able to do it, which is no easy feat. However, if you were to have your appendix removed on Earth for no reason whatsoever, just kind of prophylactically, there are risks of surgery. And that would be an occupational reason why you're having your appendix removed. And that isn't quite a tough ethical dilemma for doctors, because you're giving someone a treatment, you're giving someone surgery for something that they don't need. You're giving it just because of their job, and the risk of it being a problem down the line, it might not even be a problem down the line, if you see what I mean. So so you're right. It is a tough one. There isn't a stance at the moment, and at the moment for current space operations, it's not a requirement. But it's something to think about for exploration class missions.
Bonnie, I've got a question.
Oh, sorry, Scott, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I'll let you finish because I know what you're going to say here, I think. Go on.
So she used to do the post kind of op rounds, and if there were, some of the kids were a little bit down in the dumps after their appendix removal, she would be like, "Good news, you can be an astronaut now." And so
they'd be good candidates, because, like you say, they wouldn't have to have that. They wouldn't have to have that decision. So the next question is whether they need their molar teeth out. So.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that wasn't my question. My question was, obviously you'll put a doctor on these missions, these long-term missions, a physician with as much as skills as possible. But what if the doctor gets ill? Is the contingency to have someone else trained to, bring an astronaut to another level, or?
100%. But do you need a doctor? So that's the question is, and if you do need a doctor, what type of doctor? And how do you maintain that doctor to keep their skills up? Actually, would it be best to have someone who is like a dedicated or very specialist trained medic, who is able to take, particularly if you had communications or video comms, if you're on the moon, there's not much of a delay. It may be better use of resources to have a highly specialized doctor instructing someone who has basic, kind of advanced medical training to do the procedure, or to deliver the care that the doctor back home is instructing. So, because at the moment on the ISS they don't always have a doctor. They always have a crew medical officer, but that person's not necessarily a doctor. But the designated crew medical officer does get specific, dedicated medical training to enable them to have that role. And there's normally 2 people per crew who get that extra level of medical training. So everyone gets kind of basic medical training, but there would be more than one person who would get that extra level. So they would be trained how to do stitches, first aid, potentially even kind of anesthetic or airway or kind of minor surgery, or so depending on what they need. So, and they would go through a very intensive kind of a bit of time in the A&E, and a bit of time doing emergency medicine.
And supported by telemedicine, as we are on the aeroplane, and all, phone a friend as it is.
But then when you're on Mars, you can't really do that because you're going to have a 20-minute delay in your communication. So for Mars missions, we're going to have to learn to be far more autonomous. And you're right, those decisions haven't been made, and those decisions are currently being spoken about in space medicine circles. What medical training do you need? What do we need in a crew composition? Do we need a doctor? And to be honest, if we do, the best person probably going to be an emergency medicine physician, but they can't just be an emergency medicine physician. They need to be able to do everything else, a bit of engineering, flying the spacecraft. They can't, you don't just want someone in a dead seat, just, I'm the doctor and I can't do anything else. You need to be able to do a bit of everything.
Wow.
Fascinating. It's utterly fascinating.
Yeah. I feel like I've got so many more questions. However, Bonnie, if it's okay, I might just bring Mark back.
Sure.
Can you talk very briefly about what you're working on in the States at the moment?
Okay, sure. So I'm doing a PhD, and I'm looking at human performance with next generation helmet mounted displays. So you're all pilots. You all have kind of head up displays, right? Exactly. And here we have the Gehemics, which is kind of in some of the F-16, F-15 aircraft. So this is an optical system where it displays the symbology to the pilot through the visor. So wherever you're looking, the image is kind of displayed and reflected from your visor. In this situation, the one that you've just plugged up here, this is only being displayed. It's like a monocular, so it's only to one eye. Whereas newer aircraft like the F-35 and Typhoon have biocular systems. So they have two displays, one to each eye. And then you have, but the future is to have binocular, so it's a slightly different image to each eye. So as we look at the normal world, we have a slightly different image with each eye. So if you open and close each eye, the image is slightly different, and we are able to merge those two images to give you 3D perception. It's called stereopsis. And we're going to have in the next generation helmets 3D images within the display. And so I'm looking at performance using those, and then looking at our medical standards. So as pilots, you've all gone through your vision tests, and you probably worried about them the night before. And can I see that? Is that there? Is it red? Is it green? So I'm looking at medical standards, and if they are appropriate, and if we need to change them, and if we need to change the test methods to test pilots to make sure that we have the right people doing the job so that they can do the job, or turning around and saying to industry, these are the pilots these are the vision characteristics that they have. You need to design this equipment around what their vision abilities are to make sure that we end up with the right equipment that brings the capability to the warfighter to do their job.
And Bonnie, I find this area just totally fascinating. The F-18 helmet, I can't remember what you called it, but it's a big piece of kit. It's incredibly expensive, and this all started, I guess, with reflector gun sights in the Second World War. That's where it went. Then it became head-up displays. Then head-up displays got ever wider, and now they've gone small again, haven't they? In favour of helmets.
They're still big.
Yeah. Okay. But,
so they're in the helmet, and actually, kind of helmet-mounted displays, like started back in the kind of 100 years ago, and it was kind of with a soldier. If you just put a sight on a helmet, a soldier can then look wherever they're looking. It had a gun in the helmet, and the soldier could look wherever they were looking. They could then shoot in that direction, so they didn't have to use their hands. So in the aviation environment, wherever you're looking, you can slave it to the guns. So wherever you're looking, the guns will look. So you don't have to move your whole aircraft to look at it, but you can also display flight information on your head-up display or your helmet-mounted display. So you've got airspeed, altitude, all and heading, all kind of wherever you're looking. So you don't have to always look back to your flight controls, and that's important if you're flying in formation, if you are flying a visual mission, if you are if you're refueling, you don't want to have to look back into the cockpit. You want to keep your eyes out, and so those are the capabilities that having a head-mounted display enables. Also, with sensors, you can then feed in augmented scenes of the environment. So in a degraded visual environment. So if the viz is awful and you're able to feed in some UV or kind of sensory image to tell you what the terrain is that you're flying in, that's an enabler. That's an added capability. So it's used in rotary operations as well, who are low level.
And load of that, of absorbing all that information, presumably that's part of the considerations as well when you're designing a device like this.
Absolutely. It's not my lane. So I'm more about the vision physiology and how your eyes process how your eyes can see the information. Whereas processing in the cognitive load is kind of, it's another whole different area. But you're right. It's a big
experience of the HUD was, on takeoff. I thought I'd figured it all out, taxiing out, but on takeoff, that additional cognitive load just kind of overwhelmed me, really, just for a moment. But it was really significant, and you could sort of see where an increased level of kind of cognitive load would degrade your performance as an aviator. It was really very, very fascinating. So I find this whole area just amazing. It's no longer just a thing to protect your bonds.
Absolutely.
And that's actually something I wanted to talk about. So we're putting a huge amount of complexity now that was previously embedded into the airplane. I mean, I know we've got carbon fiber helmets now, which are slightly lighter, but Bonnie, we're putting a lot of weight on this individual's head now as well. So there's the physiological issues with that. I mean, how heavy is it? How heavy are these helmets?
So about 2.5 kilograms, but when you're under 9G, so 9 times that, it's heavy. And that's why it's important to have aerospace medicine people involved in this, because if just simply engineers are making these decisions, they don't necessarily are not fully aware of the physiological impacts on the human. So I'm an advocate for the pilot in those engineering decisions. So I work very often. I work very closely with engineers and scientists to help them make those decisions and make them aware of some of the physiological limitations of the human, to make sure that it's a human-centered design. Because you're right, like, and some of the engineers I've spoken to, particularly the optical engineers, they want to put the best optics in and do this and that, and you've got to think, whoa, it's too heavy. And not just that, you have to think about the ejection systems. Is it safe for ejection? Is it anthropometrically going to fit all of the types of pilots that we have? What size of helmets? If you just have one size of helmet, it's not going to fit everyone. So absolutely, that's why you need a kind of a medical personnel in the loop to help make these decisions.
And presumably, rather than just going for a run or whatever your fitness regime now, some neck exercises might be pretty useful if you're a fighter pilot with helmet queuing.
And the RAF is actually one of the world leaders in a baseline, kind of physio conditioning program that gives specific exercises to all different types of pilots. So fast jet, rotary pilots in particular, who come under those neck strains to try and prevent injuries in the future. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Wow, that has been so interesting.
The hour has flown past. I mean, we've gone beyond the hour. Lindsay, shall we finish with some quick fire questions for Bonnie? Some quick answers, Bonnie, to these some quick fire questions. Great.
Okay, first one. How do young people get into space medicine?
I'm glad you asked me that. Space medicine's so first of all, space medicine on its own doesn't exist. It's aviation and space medicine. So 90% of the job is aviation related, a little bit of space medicine, but anyway. So next generation of aerospace medicine. So our Twitter handle is @NextGenASM. Anyone who's interested, you don't have to be a doctor. Anyone who's interested in aviation and space medicine, get involved. It's a group that is headed by the Royal Aeronautical Society, and it helps provide mentorship. It helps provide links in to other people. It promotes different events that are happening and helps you kind of just link up with those people. So at Next Gen ASM, so I highly recommend that, and at UK_Space Labs, which is the Life and Biomedical Sciences group that I'm a member of, and it helps coordinate the different research efforts in specifically space that are going on around the UK. Those are two groups I'd highly recommend you get into.
Brilliant. And what we'll do is we'll link those, Bonnie, in the description on YouTube. So if you want to click those, we will have them in the link descriptions in YouTube. I've got a quick one.
Oh, go on, Scott. You go. Last one.
Greatest career achievement to date, Bonnie. What are you most proud of? What are you most proud of that you've achieved? Whether it be through your PhD work, when you become a doctor, or is it something else?
Do you know what? When I first came through, when I was trying to find out more about aerospace medicine, there really wasn't much out there, and it was really hard to find out information. So one of my greatest achievements is having people come up to me saying that they've heard about it, and having some younger people, so having some medical students really getting enthused about it. And those are kind of mentoring opportunities that we've enabled to help happen through the Royal Aeronautical Society. So one of my proudest achievements is having medical students who know about the specialty, and that's really great. I also got a chance to fly a Puma helicopter once, and they let me actually take control. It was really fun. So
Wow.
You said all that stuff. Oh, and I had to go with a Puma.
yeah,
Brilliant.
fun.
Yeah. You do have a link to the Puma helicopter, so don't you? So there is
I was not flying with him. To point out, it was not because of him. It was a different squadron.
I know. Yeah, not go flying with the hubby in a helicopter on a Sunday afternoon. No, we know that. We know that.
Bonnie, thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And again, I know it's difficult to find information about it, so I'm happy for anyone to get in touch through Twitter or through you. Please do pass on my details if anyone asks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bonnie.
Bonnie, brilliant. Thank you. Really inspirational. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye. Wow.
Oh my goodness, that was awesome. We've been to Mars and back, and we know how to do CPR in zero gravity.
I can wedge you, Scott, against the wall and something else.
I tell you what, there is no way we're going to be able to simulate wedging me against the wall if we've got G anywhere. I've got larger bone density, so actually I would be ideal for these missions.
You've got a lot to lose.
A lot to lose. Yeah.
Right. Next week, am I going to tell people who we've got, or do you want to give them a rundown, Scott?
Oh, well, I'll go and I'll do it. But just before we do, I want to say that I completely missed this. Somebody spotted Milo at some point. Milo must have gone past. I spotted that. Graham Braithwaite, a really good friend of the show from Cranfield, said it was absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much. And Bonnie, an incredible start to the Layover in 2021. Thanks very much for being on. That's all due to Bonnie because we're rubbish. Next week, really exciting. Hugh Nichols is coming on, another he's an ex-serving a wing commander. He's joined us to talk about some fast jet stuff because he's flown the F-16. He brought the F-35 for the first time to the UK. He flew it and displayed it at RIAT, if everyone remembers that. Was the first RAF aircraft to come across the pond. But he's no longer in the Air Force. He's left now, and he still lives in the US and flies Gulfstream's latest aircraft. So we're going to really drill down and talk about corporate aircraft and business aircraft and what's new and what is amazing, because we all know that the Gulfstream is the Rolls-Royce of corporate business aircraft. That's coming up next week.
Perfect.
Bye, everyone.
See you soon, Scott.
See you soon, everyone. Thanks for joining.